Autonomous vehicles are a very exciting and promising topic because they will have a huge impact on society as a whole, unlike any other technology.
It will fundamentally restructure the way we think about transportation and make life easier for billions of people.
The global autonomous vehicle market size is projected to grow tenfold between 2019 and 2026, from $54 billion to $556 billion in just 7 years.
The topic is not without complexity, and there are many challenges that need to be overcome. But it is being worked on heavily, and we can already see a lot of progress.
Today, we will discuss the history of AVs, its technology, the market, its benefits and challenges, its applications, and what a day in the life of a utopia would look like.
Let's dive into it. So autonomous vehicles, or AVs, is quite an old topic, as so many technology topics are. Developments have already started in the 70s and 80s, but still the breakthroughs that we are looking at, and the reason we are discussing this topic in our podcast today, is that those breakthroughs are quite recent. So what happened in the 70s and 80s? Maybe you can talk a bit more about that, Ani.
So it all started in 1977 with the first semi-automated car that had cameras, analog computers, and also included some marked streets and rails. And it was developed by Japan's Tsukuba Mechanical Engineering Laboratory. And what followed from then were institutions like DARPA, the US Army, the US Navy continued to invest in these autonomous vehicles. They had a first prototype that included obstacle avoidance. By 1995, they worked together with the National Automated Highway System and the Carnegie Mellon University NAV Lab to create a first autonomous coastal drive, a car that drove for more than 4,500 kilometers entirely autonomous.
Yeah, as with so many other technologies, a lot of this is driven by army operations and by research based on governmental organizations, and it's not different with AVs.
Exactly, yeah. So the funding went on, and since then, primarily the U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy have had incremental advances, but it seems that it was just being invested in. There was no clear direction, and only very recently, in fact, in the last 10 years, has this topic really sprung up. So the record set by the NAV Lab and DARPA in 1995 of 4,500 kilometers was broken only in 2015 by Delphi. They worked together with Audi, and that same year, in fact, 6 states in the US allowed for testing of self-driving cars on public roads. So it's really only in the last decade that we've seen a real uprisal in autonomous vehicles and their prominence.
Yeah. Also, along with that, the development of smart intersections or smart highways, which are interacting with the AVs. We have an example in 2012, University of Texas computer science department started with that. Now, the leading company in this, and we're also going to look into this when we discuss market players, is Tesla, which since 2014 builds cars with autopilot in it. So since then, you can actually activate your autopilot in your Tesla, obviously still being liable as the driver. In Europe, 2015, 2016 has brought along new developments. For instance, for us here in Switzerland, we have the postal car, which has first tested and developed their self-driving postal cars, as well as the telecommunications firm, which has also experimented with AVs.
Exactly. So, and in 2016, the EU followed with some funding for automated driving, and we've just seen more and more players enter. So in 2017, 2018, we have Arizona State University that developed intersection and intersection management techniques. Waymo joined in 2017. They started their first commercial service in Phoenix, Arizona in 2018, December. And in 2018, MIT also joined the game. Yandex also released Europe's first robotaxi service. So there's been a lot going on. But how does this work? What is the technology behind self-driving cars? And we've broken it down into the most fundamental components, but one thing that we really have to talk about before we can get into autonomous driving is what the levels of autonomous driving are, and what implications these may have. So released by the SAE in 2014, they have identified 6 levels of driving automation. It ranges from 0 to 5. Level 0 is when the car does not have any level of automation. The driver has complete control of the car at all times, as we know it. Level 1 already includes some sort of automated system where the driver and the system share control for the car. This includes cruise control, adaptive cruise control, so you don't just control speed, but also the distance to other cars. You adapt your speed, parking assistance, lane keeping assistance, and automatic emergency braking. These are all examples of level 1 driving automation. Level
Exactly.
2.
So as we rise in those levels, what is interesting to observe is the more we rise, the more automatic it gets, and also the more complicated it gets, and the more impact it has on regulation and societal change. And maybe if we'll see that also in level 2, if you go ahead now.
So level 2 means the system already takes full control of the vehicle. So we're not just talking accelerating and braking, but also steering. The driver must, however, still monitor the driving and should be ready to intervene immediately. So while your car drives itself, you still have to be alert at the wheel, hands-on at all times. And this is what we're seeing in most cars today, due to regulatory and societal issues where you have cars that can drive themselves, but you as a driver have to be at the wheel at all times. Level 3 then means that the driver can safely turn their attention away. However, the driver can be informed that he must take over, not immediately. So if the car gets into a situation where it thinks it would be better for the driver to take over, it would notify the driver a few minutes in advance. The driver would then intervene. A next level of this is level 4, which includes that of level 3, but there's no driver attention required at all. So the driver could watch a movie, he could be on his phone, he could go to sleep. The car would take care of itself. But in areas where the self-driving is not supported or not allowed, the vehicle must be able to safely abort the trip. So in those cases, level 4 is still not complete automation. Would you like to tell what level 5 is, what the extreme version of automation would be?
Yeah, please tell us.
Oh, okay. So level 5 means there's no human interaction required at all. At this point, it's like sitting in a train. The vehicle works on all surfaces, all over the world, all year round, in all terrains, in all weather conditions. So this is the ultimate automation of driving, level 5. But so today we are at level 2 of autonomous driving. But what exact specific features does autonomous driving include?
Some of the features we already see in cars today, for instance, parking assistance or navigation. Interestingly, new features are emerging as we speak. Something like an automated lane keeping system has only been around for a few years now, but also adaptive cruise control or improved collision avoidance systems, for instance, through emergency braking. All of these things have been around for quite some time and are being improved upon. What is new, though, would be the ability of widespread signage and roadwork detection through a car by its sensors. We can also talk about traffic detection and avoidance, which is also something that cars in the future will increasingly be able to do, as well as lane assistance, which serves to keep the car in the middle of the lane, with the Volvo Pilot Assistant being able to do this, for instance. But how exactly does that work? There are several components in that.
Exactly. So we break it down into software and hardware, and there's a third component that goes beyond the car, but we look at that more detailed in the application. So the two main components are the software and the hardware, and these need to work together for autonomous driving to really take place. So in software, we have two components. We have the measuring and the learning. So we need some sort of inputs in which the car measures and perceives its surroundings, and then the learning in which it improves, recognizes these objects and improves itself. So in measuring, you have three different variations. You have the Bayesian SLAM, or simultaneous localization and mapping algorithms, and these kind of map the vehicle's location based on information of other moving objects. Then we have the real-time location system. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, with this one, we can identify and track the location of other objects as well, but in this case, based on radio waves, which is like either radio waves, infrared, or ultrasound waves. This does not include any of speed, direction, or spatial orientation. Interestingly, what we need to do here is, as this car increasingly uses many sensors, there is the need for sensor fusion, which is including the information from several sensors and having the car take a decision based on that, which means that a lot of this is probability based. So the car needs to decide what is the probability that, for instance, a car is ahead of me, given that I have sensor information from two different sources. Or what is the probability that I have an issue with safety, given that the sensor is telling me that a car is to the right, but another sensor is telling me that the car is moving away from me, just as an example. So it needs to combine information from several sensors, which then yields a higher probability of correct information. For learning, the idea is that the car does not necessarily measure what's going on outside, but it already knows that because it has learned it based on computer vision. Here we could think about deep learning applications. The OpenCV library by Intel allows for computer vision in an advanced manner today already. Essentially, the use of convolutions, of convolutional neural networks in image recognition that computers are able to do today. But this is increasingly complex, and also think about the additional requirements that a car or a computer within a car needs to fulfill. So the car would be able to do this when you compare it to sensors. Another one would be reinforcement learning, which is the car learning to drive in a sort of game environment. And we know that the kilometers driven by an autonomous vehicle, by an AV, they determine how well the car is in a computer science application, in an algorithm sense, but also in terms of safety, right? If this car has not created any accidents within a few thousand or even millions of kilometers, then it can be applied onto public roads, that it will get the permission. But the same applies for reinforcement learning, where the car needs to repeatedly go through these situations, through these game-like situations, in order then to learn how to behave in an optimal manner. Finally, what will also lead to an improvement in learning is we'll have better sensors, more data around through the kilometers driven, as well as transfer learning, right? So we can take the algorithm from one car and place it into another car. And so the car doesn't start from scratch. We can share data in general and also create better simulations. Who says the car needs to actually drive on the road? Maybe, as we've also discussed around simulations in our first episode about virtual reality, maybe we can just create a better simulation and have the car drive there, right? But Ani, as you tell us, all of this only works with hardware, right? So we need to have the right hardware.
Exactly. So this is the software component, but all these inputs that you mentioned in the sensor fusion method, they all need several input options. And we've seen autonomous cars, with the cameras on top, rotating. So what components are there in the hardware? So these autonomous vehicles are, high-tech devices, and all of them use some of these concepts. So all of them have radars, either long, medium, and short. Usually they have all of them. And these radars can either be a radar, LiDAR, or sonar, which are just inferring your environment using a different medium. In LiDAR, it's a laser. In sonar, it's sound. They also use motion sensors, ultrasound, geopositioning. So a lot of them use GPS as well as maps, like OpenStreetMaps. And of course, they use artificial intelligence, as we saw, the computer/machine vision learning, and cameras, and for the visual inputs. So are there any other important things next to these?
Something interesting is the IMU, or inertial measurement unit, which also gives us angular rate and orientation based on the gyroscope. This is important because we've had the example already. Let's say a car is next to me, but it's moving away from me, so there's no collision, no threat of collision. But it's moving towards me, then the collision threat is much bigger. So that's also information we need to have. Ultimately, we want our car to have 3D vision, so it should have spatial orientation. It should not just perceive 2D images, but it should also be able to see distances, so to speak, on the image itself. And
exactly.
Another one is that's interesting, especially in the future when we will have more autonomous vehicles on the streets, LED and light systems that are able to communicate with other humans and with unconnected cars. So that the unconnected participants are still able to understand what the AV does. For instance, if the AV wants to turn onto a side street or turn in general, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, there's also an aspect of authenticating. So for locking or opening your delivery truck or car, that you might use a QR code. But these specific applications are more minor adjustments. And we discussed the kind of bigger technologies that are used in the hardware components of autonomous vehicles. Then, of course, there's the factor of not just software and hardware within the car, but also beyond the vehicle, right? When you have networking capabilities with other cars, infrastructures, or even centralized institutions. But we'll get to that in our next topic, which is the application area. So now that we know what this technology is, how could we apply it? And the most obvious one, as we've seen with Tesla, is private cars, right? So now you could drive in traffic without having to actually drive and get frustrated. You could take your time off, you could watch a movie, you could get some sleep. One automatically thinks of cars, and then beyond that also transportation. But I think it can go much farther beyond just human transportation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When we say transportation, we also need to distinguish between public transportation and the new forms of transportation. For instance, robotaxis, and also the idea that private companies are offering AV transportation in the future, just like Uber could or Lyft could. This is especially interesting because they have a lot of driving data, and they are designing their own maps. So this really gives them an edge in terms of developing AVs that can be safe and bring around the passengers. Another one is robotic delivery. Just think about the fact that delivery in the future will be looking much different.
I mean, they already have a pilot now, right, with KFC in China, where they have autonomous vehicles delivering food.
Exactly. So in this case, it's like delivery in the sense of on the street. So you can go to so you can, on your app, you can get your food, and then the truck will come to your direction, and you will be able to interact with the truck. So when we talk about delivery, we not just talk about delivering something, but also being able to interact with the user so that the user can retrieve his good and then send you back, or send you to the next user, so to speak. So robotic delivery in the future will also be a big one. It is in direct competition when we talk about AVs with drones, but then you could say a drone is also an AV, it's just on a car. But in general, I think delivery will be heavily automated in the future.
And not just like smaller deliveries. We're also talking bigger deliveries, like trucks. And we saw the Tesla Semi, which is I think set to come out next year, where you have an actual truck that can drive on its own. So as a trucker, you don't have to wait up and actually drive the entire time. You could sleep in your truck and so get the delivery done on time or even sooner. And one interesting aspect that you don't traditionally think about when talking of autonomous vehicles is racing, right? I mean, you could have high-speed races where companies are kind of not just displaying their cars but also their algorithms, and you have a whole Ford versus Ferrari scenario all over again, right? That's something interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's different levels of automation as we've discussed. So today, different applications of driving have been sold already, just like parking or also navigating a traffic jam. So this is different functions that cars already are doing autonomously today. But as you said before, it gets really interesting when AVs can communicate with each other. And
exactly. I mean, I was just thinking about it. You mentioned traffic. Google Maps uses phones. But if you have cars actually communicating with each other, right? I mean, the traffic management would be so much easier because you could get real-time data. These algorithms could work together and just save time for everybody. But the idea of platooning, where cars can communicate with each other, work together, is really intriguing. So, like, what could you do with that? How does that work?
So there has been already some thoughts around a so-called DAO, or a decentralized autonomous organization. But essentially what we're talking about is, as you said, this traffic platoon system. So you said already that you can manage traffic in a much different manner. You can obviously also increase safety and avoid collisions. But apart from that, what it is really able to do is it's organizing the traffic. So if we have smart highways that are connected with the participating AVs, then you have the ability to increase the capacity of the highway, make sure that its use is, it's being used more efficiently, and also that for the participating AVs, they can pass much faster through it, which can reduce travel time overall. So
yeah, I mean, also if they travel much more faster, maybe you don't need 5 or 6 lanes in a highway, right? Maybe you could do it 3 or 4. If the cars are much more safer, can react faster, they communicate with each other, you can not just prevent accidents, but you could also now think of going at, instead of 120 kilometers an hour, you could think of 200, 250, 300 kilometers an hour, be faster, save more time, and be safer. That's amazing.
Yeah, but these platooning systems, they offer some challenges. But before we go into the challenges, let's first consider further benefits that AVs have for society. And I think Ani has a lot to tell us on that.
All right. So the benefits and challenges, they really depend on the regulations, right? Where do the resources flow? How do we as a society adapt towards this new notion of mobility, of travel, or new demand? So let's get into it. One of the most obvious ones is safety. Safety, in that we could prevent 90%, and maybe if we have complete automation, all cars being automatic, even 100% of road safety incidents. I mean, we're talking in the US alone, 25,000 lives every year worldwide. That's 1.35 million lives every year around the world that we could save. And these effects only really come into play after we've transitioned, right? And interestingly enough, you mentioned before that 13% of the organs that are donated in the US come from car crash victims. So there's this, odd bit that we would actually, organ donations would go down.
Yeah, that's a sad dilemma. On the one hand, we make the world much more safe, and we save millions of lives. And then on the other hand, we have a shortage of organs that are being donated. Yeah.
But I mean, on the other hand, by saving lives, you free up healthcare resources, right? So these could be reinvested in organ donations, incentivize it. So, I mean, improved safety, navigation. It's also much easier for military operations or explorations. It makes it much more easier. The entire use of vehicles becomes much more safer.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think safety-wise, those are it. Now we'll get to some of the more, so obvious, but maybe not as obvious economic benefits. So
yeah, We've already talked about traffic and how the roads can be used more efficiently with AVs, especially if they are connected to each other. And it also increases the capacity of the roads. And we are talking magnitudes of 200 to 500% higher capacity. So this is not small benefits. This is relevant. This is significant. Another one is that when you are commuting in an AV, obviously your attention is not focused on driving, at least in the future when you are when it's completely autonomous. And obviously that frees up your time, which economically is very significant as well. If 1 or 2 hours a day are not being spent into driving, but you can use them to work or to do whatever, and it could also reduce the working hours.
It's not even just gaining extra time, it's also saving the stress, right? Traffic is a huge adding factor to stress, and the amount of lives that you can just improve by being able to use the time more productively, whether you want to maybe watch a movie, maybe get some more sleep, maybe write a letter, maybe phone with someone. There's so many things you could do now that you have 2 to 3 hours a day of more time on your hands. It's incredible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Further economic cost is when we talk about public transport being autonomous, you obviously don't need any drivers for that anymore. Obviously, that has some impact on drivers industry, and obviously that will make a lot of public transport workers unemployed. But as for the benefit, it could reduce the cost of the transportation systems. Another one, and this is interesting, is parking lands. Because let's consider, for instance, Los Angeles, 14% of LA area is parking. So that's 1 square meter in 6 square meters is parking. And AVs can dramatically reduce the area of parking, or the area that we need to contribute towards parking, because they can stay in motion for longer, and because also the time and the space when and where they are parking can be much more efficiently organized. That freed up space can be used, right?
Of course. I mean, you could, instead of just having parking lots, you could create, natural habitats. I mean, it could be small things, right? You could maybe add some more trees, add a bit more green into the concrete jungle. You could create more housing, make housing more affordable, and you can generally make those pieces of land more productive, not just in economic terms, but also with regaining natural habitat, etc. And another interesting aspect is now that in a car, if you have more attention freed up because you're not focused on driving, this would incentivize advertising industries to start placing ads along roads, driveways, etc. So that definitely means that you'll have a higher, more spent in advertising, or that industry booming. So
yeah, absolutely. Because entertainment and advertising is limited by our attention span. So the time per day that we have attention that can be spent and can be used is limited. But if the driving part is also solved, then for me personally, sadly, but for the entertainment industry, luckily and fortunately, this can also be freed up in order to display ads and sell entertainment to users.
Of course, yeah. And those are kind of the economic. I mean, as we mentioned with the advertising, there are many little things that are unanticipated benefits that we will only see once we've really done it. Back when horses were still being driven and the first introduction of cars, we thought that, well, we're just removing the horse. But what it really enabled was much bigger than anybody could have thought of. So I'm sure we'll see much more benefits economically. And the third aspect is sustainability, right? It's much better for the environment. So fuel efficiency increases by 20 to 40%. So you have lower energy demand. You won't have traffic lights, etc. So this means that it's better for the environment at large. Another aspect is we're already seeing a trend with Uber, with car sharing, with car renting industries, that the car sharing economy is growing, right? Cars are no longer a status symbol. And with these autonomous vehicles, now you could allow people to transport themselves to to gain mobility without even having to drive, or having to know how to drive, meaning that you could have more people but in fewer cars. So this could be a more efficient way of transporting people.
Yeah. Consider that if you have a shared car with your family members or your flat share members, instead of that car being close to your location, so let's say you drive to work and then you leave your car there, in the meantime, that car could autonomously drive somewhere else and pick up your friend or work for your friend or whatever. So also in terms of where the car is and that the car moves in between when it's not actually moving people is also a big time efficiency benefit. And some small thing I'd like to add just as an explanation, why are traffic lights become oblivious in smart highways? Because why do we need traffic lights? We need them for us humans to see. However, with a smart highway, cars and AVs are seeing in a different manner. They don't need light to see; they need sensors, and they need data in general. And thus, it might be one option that we get rid of traffic lights and thus save a lot of energy.
I think it's very likely, because I mean, you have cars not just, looking at lights, looking at whether another person has an indicator. The cars are communicating with each other. And I don't know if you've ever seen these huge flocks of birds, but many people wondered how those birds don't crash into each other when they're flying at high speeds. And it seems that they have an inbuilt response or a reaction that when they're on a collision course, all birds always escape to the right. So you have both birds kind of escaping each other. And that's a crude way, but if you apply that to the system of cars, right, they're communicating in milliseconds, taking thousands of decisions in split seconds. The chances of you could probably just keep driving at 60 kilometers an hour consistently, even at crossroads, because these cars can time each other so well and communicate. So, I mean, we can, you could probably reduce everything down to 1 or 2 lanes and just have these cars do their thing without any intersections and whatnot. So there's a lot of room for improvement. And one aspect you mentioned before was that the car actually works for you or generates money as an asset, right? Traditionally, cars are seen as a liability. You take it out from the store, you've already lost 30% of your value, right? But now, if you have autonomous vehicles, they can actually go be a taxi during the day. In fact, they noted that private cars are used about 5% of the time. Imagine the 95% of the time the car is just sitting and accruing a loss for you, whereas an autonomous
using
vehicle,
parking space as well.
Yeah. Exactly, right? I mean, geez, what an inefficient system. And I mean, you create you create more income, and you also increase mobility for people who can't drive, young, elderly, the disabled, etc. Exactly. So these are all the benefits, and they sound all rosy and nice, but there is some obstacles to get there, and we'll look at them now. So what are the challenges of autonomous vehicles?
First of all, and we've discussed this before, like we've wrapped our head around the question, the net effect of AVs on the environment. Is it positive or not? Because there's also some counter effects. Consider that as traveling gets even more convenient, because you don't need to drive yourself, your AV comfortably brings you somewhere, you can enjoy the time in the AV. One prediction is that there will be increased demand for mobility. And that could generally reduce or even reverse the benefits of having fewer cars through more efficient roads, because when people travel more, you need those cars then again. And then also,
even beyond that, I think, many people who are maybe using the cycle because of the ecological benefits and, not polluting the environment. If we assume that we have, electric cars or even just these petrol cars that are more efficient, increased fuel efficiency usually means that more people are likely to use it, because they think that because it's efficient, I'm not harming the environment as much. So sometimes, if it's very efficient, more people use it to the point where you're actually creating more environmental damage than you were before. So there's that aspect too.
Yeah. And then also resources being used for AV. Apart from the lithium batteries, which is a question of what sort of car you have, there's also the question of how to power the systems within a car. A car with connectivity, a car with internet connection, a car with several inboard, onboard entertainment services obviously needs more electricity and power. And this also needs to be taken into consideration when we talk about the net effect of AVs on sustainability and power consumption. Other challenges here are economic nature. For instance, when we talk about the companies or the actors in the industry, we see that the main drivers, the main market players are Silicon Valley companies, including the typical ones: Facebook, Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, also Tesla and other Uber, Lyft, right? All Silicon Valley companies. But then also various players from China, car manufacturers, and the governments. So consider that all of these companies spend a lot of money into this, and this is also the reason why this technology is rather moving fast. But consider also that this is rather, or at least in our understanding, it's rather a one takes it all, or winner takes it all, or platform model than it is a free market model. So economically, it might lead to increased power for big tech and or car companies like Google with Waymo, or in combination with, I don't know, BMW, Daimler,
Volvo with Uber, right? They're all working together, because many companies are now working together with NVIDIA. So I think, the supply chain of creating a car just became much more expansive. And that means that the kind of barriers to enter the market are much higher, meaning that those in the market now will enjoy more power. And I think, the first people to really get up to level 3, level 4, or even level 5 of autonomous driving will really have a lot of say in this market. So
especially when we think about the tech companies, they get an additional source of data, an additional source about their users, which leads them to integrate more services, and it really is something that builds up, right? It's
of course,
it's
if you consider that with 5G for these cars, we'll get into that later, but combining these with all that the tech companies take and give, it's the integrated service, there might be some things that we can't expect or foresee. And then the obvious other economic challenge are the layoffs in the taxi industry, maybe even in the transportation industry, right? Food deliveries, now you don't need any person to deliver, you just need someone to cook. The drivers of lorries and trucks, if they just have to sit, or soon they don't even have to be in it, if it's a group of autonomous vehicles controlled from a central institution, maybe from the headquarters, then it becomes hard to defend their jobs, right? So those are some economic challenges that we see. But
interestingly, I have a list here of other industries that could also be impacted, seeing workers being laid off and unemployment. And that's interesting because consider, for instance, car manufacturers, because it could be that less cars are being needed. Another one is the car insurers. What is there to insure if there
are no accidents?
Yeah,
right.
Petroleum industry, crash repair shops, talking about less accidents, roadside restaurants, because if you're able to enjoy your food while being in the car, if the in-car
exactly, you don't need to take a break, right? You don't need those kind of stops in the highway where you park your car, take a break, maybe go to the toilet, eat something. You won't have those needs anymore. You can just, that is true. Yeah, I got.
And finally, also the short haul flights. So if you have a 2-hour flight, and from today's perspective, driving the same distance would be a hassle. If you don't have to drive yourself, and if you can enjoy the time on board, this could increase pressure onto the flight industry as well, in competing between AV transportation and short haul flights.
Or just imagine if the airline industry also introduced autonomous flying, right? It would be another extension.
Yeah, that's a whole other story. Yeah.
So those are the kind of economic or more socioeconomical challenges that have to be faced. Then we have the purely societal ones, right? So you have public perception. People are not that fast to adopt to new technologies. It takes a bit of approval, getting familiar with it. Then you have the fact that maybe people don't know how to drive anymore because it's simply not required. Why the hell would you want to drive if you have an autonomous vehicle, right? So these are more societal issues. Maybe you have some more, or
Yeah, I couldn't actually believe it, but when apparently in 1900, when elevators were introduced into the market, it took a lot of budget by the advertising industry being spent in 2 or 3 decades until people accepted the fact that elevators would be sort of autonomous.
And but the funny thing is, they did not really accept it until the 70s or 80s, because up until then you had people actually standing and pressing the buttons, right? People were actually afraid to accept this. But I think, as we know, technological progression happens much faster. So I think we would be a little better at adapting towards new technologies than someone in the 1900s, just because the progress there was not as fast as it is today.
Yeah, what hinders that a bit is what I would call reverse survivorship bias. So survivorship bias is essentially that you only see those that are turning out to be successful. For instance, if you look at startup founders, you're not going to talk about most of the time about those that failed, but only those that successfully made an exit or an IPO. But here, it is the opposite. So reverse survivorship bias. We're not going to talk about the millions of kilometers that an AV has passed without causing an accident. But every time an accident happens with an AV, it's potentially a big media scandal. Just like recently when a Tesla autopilot accident happened.
Yeah, I mean, to think about that, it's driven millions of miles and its record is 1 or 2 accidents in millions of miles compared to usual drivers, Yeah. So public perception really has to catch on before this can really become widespread to the point where we gain 100% automation on the roads. Yeah, I think that sort of summarizes it on the societal aspects. Then, of course, we have the legal aspects, and it gets kind of interesting, right? So you have the liability.
Sorry, I have one more thing on the society.
Oh, okay, then go ahead.
We talked about technology. Consider that 25% of people, so 1 in 4, trust parking assistants. And that is after they know, and we all know, that parking assistant performs much better than us parking ourselves. And still only 25% of people trust their parking assistant. So consider this. Also consider when you compare it to planes, because in planes, we are used to the fact that most of the things in the plane are automated. So it's a very, very complex machine with lots of systems, lots of redundancies as well to prevent system crashes. But we've sort of gotten used to it. So when, for instance, sadly last year the MCAS scandal happened, it
was 2 years ago, I think, actually,
or 2 years ago, exactly, when the Boeings essentially due to the failure of sensors crashed down. No one was like, yeah, let's remove all the sensors and let's go back to Stone Age and have everything manually. Because for us, it's clear that these systems just perform better than us humans and that we need them in order to automate functions. So it's just interesting how perception develops over time and how also it needs its time and it needs a lot of effort from a lot of different institutions, and including the advertising industry, so that people will be like, yeah, self-driving cars, AVs, I like that.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, it would change the idea of a car, right? It's no longer a kind of a status object. It just becomes something that gets you from A to B, right? So that aspect changes too, and we'll have to deal with that change as we go forward. Yeah, I think
for good reasons, as you'll see with the legal aspects now.
Exactly. I mean, so, right, as we mentioned, the regulations, what is allowed, which areas are allowed, or some areas support self-driving, maybe others don't. So this uncertainty of policies and their implementations in, everything from urban planning to zoning, pricing, pricing maybe for different levels of automation. So it's not per se a challenge. It's just that this uncertainty means that we can make very accurate predictions about how this will be finally implemented. So it really depends on how lawmakers approach and accept this, and it would take time.
Let's consider for a minute. You'd be a zone planner of a big city in 5 years from now, and you have to ask yourself how I'm gonna do zoning, how I'm gonna do urban planning, and you have to rely on scenarios. And the scenarios can range from everything: traffic will be automated, fully AV-based traffic, to it will be more or less today plus. So there will be, most of it will still be manually driven vehicles and then some automation.
It's a tectonic shift, right? I mean, combining with the fact that in LA, 14% of the land is parking land. If cars can now drive faster, you don't need 3 or 4 lanes. Maybe just 1 lane is enough. There's no traffic. Maybe the whole thing could be kind of boring style, underground, or all you need is one way, meaning you have a lot more place for buildings. How do you plan the city? How does it happen with urban sprawl, right? If cities are more connected, do you have this kind of sprawl? Can people afford to live in more remote areas? I mean, it's really a tectonic shift of societies, the way computers had it, right? You don't have to go work in a factory. You can work from anywhere in the world. So this will have a lot of outcome, a lot of impact on
what infrastructure do I need to build? When do I need to build the infrastructure? What's the cycle? When do I need to renew it? Big impact from that topic.
Exactly. And then you have of course accident liability, right? In case an accident does happen, right? As of now it's pretty clear, but once we get into higher levels of automation, is it maybe the person in the front seat? Is it the car company? Is it the third party? So a famous case that we always used to hear is a mother sends her son to school in an autonomous vehicle, and the autonomous vehicle crashes into a cyclist. Is it the cyclist's fault? Is it the car manufacturer? Is it the mother? Is it the child? Right? So these issues have to be worked out. And as of now, I think it's the driver has to remain alert and hands-on at all times. So the driver is liable if something happens. But it already gets iffy here, because if the computer reacts quickly and is suddenly involved in an accident, right, whose fault is it then? But these are, again, uncertainties that we will only get to see once they happen. So only time will tell.
Yeah, only time will tell, as well as with the technical developments. So we've already discussed the issue with planes previously. We have the same issue with cars potentially, when there's a susceptibility of sensors, navigation systems to things like rainfall, hail, or snow. And this can all impact the sensor's measurement abilities, and thus the car's ability to navigate and to know what's happening outside.
Exactly. But I think, I'm sure there are solutions around this. So I think this is one of the problems where I'm confident that we can solve it, like sensor fusion, as you mentioned, right? Use different types of sensor, maybe you combine LiDAR and 2-3 other technologies, maybe you include sonar as well. And, but it is an interesting topic, but I think it's something a challenge that can be overcome.
Yeah, but something that is new really here is the complexity of storage, compute, and performance requirements of a car, because the car is becoming a computational system more so than just a mechanic system, which means it needs to deal with data, and with lots of it. It needs to deal with high volume of data, with data that is flowing in real-time velocity, and that has a variety of formats.
So there really you have the 3 V's of big data, right?
Exactly. It's a big data problem. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it doesn't just become a computer. It's not just a car. It now has a fully functioning computer on board that has to do a lot of calculations in a very fast time and react very quickly, right? So those are technological barriers. And again, if you combine that with quantum computers or AI, those challenges can not only overcome, I think we can solve problems that we didn't even know we had or gain privileges that.
The difference here is the margin of error, right? It's also when we're introducing AI into new areas of life, we are entering areas where the margin of error is very small. And with road safety, the margin of error indeed is very small. If the car for once doesn't know what's happening, it can cause a big accident. The same applies to the road infrastructure. So if we have a networked road infrastructure, this infrastructure also needs to have the ability to do real-time decision making. So if that is impeded, for instance, if we have delays in the network, or if any kind of part is just experiencing a downtime, then this can have huge impact on road safety and can cause accidents.
Yeah, and that will be crucial, right? So there's a lot more requirements that the car has to fulfill, not just the engine, but also computer system, navigation system, connections that all have to be up and running at high precision. And then there's the more kind of, popular claims or challenges against. So what happens if someone hacks the vehicle? What happens if, what if the security of not just a vehicle, but multiple vehicles or the network is compromised? And I recently saw a video where Elon Musk was explaining that you have the autonomous software in a Tesla, but I'm not sure whether they have it or they plan to implement it, but they have a button where you can manually disengage the software and take over control. So in case it happens that, right, someone takes over, the easiest is to just have a manual switch to just disengage software and the car. So yeah, that's still something, when we're talking of multiple vehicles or networks, or maybe a virus that kind of jumps through these nodes. So those are the things that need to be looked at. And then, of course, legal issues require that a car is thoroughly tested and an algorithm is thoroughly tested. So you need millions and millions of kilometers of testing, which again raises the barriers of entry to markets, making it a much more oligopolistic market.
Yeah, for the testing, you also need to have a driver still in the seat, obviously. And
of course,
the way that the testing is being evaluated is by how many disengagements you have. And disengagements are essentially the number of human interventions that happen during testing. Now, a lot of car companies and also tech companies are outsourcing this to third world countries. And so you could say that in low-income communities, this is an additional source of income as well. But in general, as you said, there is the challenge of these systems having to be tested for long times.
Yeah, what about privacy concerns?
Yeah, so more data means more concerns regarding mass surveillance, especially if you consider that a lot of data that is being issued by a car, that a car will generate, that is being generated by a car, that data will be shared with authorities, that data will be shared with police, and that data will be shared with the manufacturer. And there's
interestingly enough, in Germany, I heard that the police was considering using Teslas instead of they traditionally use BMWs as their vehicles. They consider Teslas, but Tesla said that all the data that they collect from driving will be stored in California, all the measurements that the car does. So the German police was forced to not accept this deal or not buy Teslas because of privacy and security concerns.
Yeah, interestingly, and I want to enter into the discussion as well that because it's Tesla and Tesla is an American company, Tesla theoretically and practically needs to share any data that US authorities request from them towards US authorities. So if German police uses Tesla cars, then theoretically US authorities know exactly when and how these cars are being used and where the police is operating, etc.
And you could big take over, right?
Privacy issue.
I mean, Volvo has this feature, if I understand correctly, that if you're driving the car and they notice that you're drunk driving, it takes over remotely and drives you to the police station. How crazy is that?
Wow. Yeah. And where do we put the limits onto this? And this is really a question that regulators, we as society, and the companies themselves, talking about the responsibility,
exactly, these normative
decide.
issues, right? These ethical issues that now, you know, suddenly have to be implemented into these AIs, right? So a famous one, the trolley problem, right? If you have to choose between, you know, in an incident where somebody suddenly jumps onto the road, or a group of children, right? Do you crash into them? Do you avert and crash, injuring the driver? So these are ethical dilemmas that, interestingly, for the first time, have to be implemented into an AI. So that would be interesting to see how it is done. And I think that will be a big precursor to how we handle ethics and AI. And then in the future, how AI handles us, right? But
I absolutely love talking about ethical scenarios, but just to show you, the audience, how complex this is, a few further challenges that we've also noted down is the systems need to be robust and also immune to failure. Then consider the fact that if all these systems network with each other, you have a higher demand towards the frequency spectrum, so a higher saturation of the frequency spectrum, with 5G as being the potential solution to that. You have more complex supply chains for cars and networks that we've already discussed, because those are becoming computational systems, including connectivity. You'll need to have different parts from different parts of the world. You need to have different skills for mechanics in order to fix those cars. Also, potentially massive, expensive changes to road infrastructure, which are being financed by taxpayers, not by the BMWs and the Googles of the world. And as we'll discuss now, and as you've already teased, our current inability to translate ethics into AI and into software code, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, MIT, they've simulated the context of autonomous cars and kind of how people make decisions. And, you know, and then you see things like, you know, if you see a criminal, for instance, you'd rather crash into a criminal than, say, a dog or a child. Or, you know, if you prefer dogs over cats, that you might escape a dog to crash into a cat, or vice versa. So
Crazy.
kind of getting these ethical dilemmas that, I mean, there's no solution to the trolley problem, right? That's what that makes it a dilemma. How are we going to implement this into AI?
Yeah, just I don't want to extend this too much, but just a quick primer into the trolley problem. So there is essentially, you have the option between doing nothing and killing one person, and doing something in order to kill three people. And there's the utilitarian view, which simply says that killing one person is better than killing three people, which I would subscribe to. But there is also the deontologist view, which states that doing nothing is better in any case, because you're not actively killing people. So the deontologist view would be rather looking into principles and rules that govern your behavior rather than your results, which would be more utilitarian. And now, as even us humans, we are not clear about this. And it also depends on whether we are in the car ourselves, they found out in the MIT study. Because if we are in the car ourselves, we perceive the situation much, much differently. And we do subscribe to utilitarian policies as much as we would if we are not. But even for us humans now, this is very complex, and we do not really have a right answer. But consider then translating this into software, which gets even more complex.
Yeah.
Now the more, please.
No, go ahead.
Now the more practical thing is also we haven't talked about that much, but it's very important. Consider the fact that drivers and passengers, or drivers and any sort of entity that interacts in the traffic system, they will change the behavior, and they will have to change the behavior. What we mean by this is, for instance, that drivers, when they are not actively driving and just sitting behind the wheel, they still need to be able to come into the picture when the car needs them, so to speak. Right? So potentially what we have is a lack of awareness in terms of the driver in the beginning, right? So he doesn't know that he potentially might have to take over. So that is essentially relevant in the transition phase when the car is not fully autonomous. And it's also relevant for liability cases. It's relevant for it's relevant for how you regulate this. Essentially, once the autonomous vehicle or once the vehicle will be vastly autonomous, the driver will be unprepared to take over. He will not. There will be a de-skilling. The drivers will not be able to drive any further, or will not have the same skill level. And there will be lower levels of driver experience.
Yeah, at which point it will become like riding horses today, right? It becomes a thing that only very few people have the the opportunity of doing, where you actually go rent a car and drive on the track.
Yeah, but it's not just about the behavior that people need to learn or unlearn. It's also how people will react to those systems. For instance, the idea of risk compensation.
Yeah.
So people, either in their role as drivers, but even more importantly, as in their role as other traffic participants, they will engage in riskier behavior in order to test whether the system is actually that safe and or can actually.
They just trust the system, right? So
they
think
just assume that
it's super safe. So sure, I can maybe speed past that car, or I can overtake in a one lane. So yeah. I think this general thing of safety has to be right. It has to. The Automobile Association and insurance associations have advocated for awareness to increase this, safety. So that's something that has to be worked on as well. I mean, cars are safer, autonomous vehicles are safer, but that's assuming that all cars on the road are autonomous, right?
Yeah. So, and this closes down the loop on why we need exact definitions, just like the SAE has it with their international classifications, because we need an exact definition into those levels with changing reaction time needed, human intervention needed, and how autonomous the car is, because this has a huge impact on all those things that we've discussed. So having standards, having a common language, having clear definitions is very crucial.
Yeah, so that, as you mentioned, those 6 levels, right? Maybe the lower you are on that level scale, the more the driver has to take care. So maybe lawmakers can incentivize people to use higher levels of automated driving because it's safer for all the benefits, right? A clear distinction, as you mentioned, a clear understanding, one that's not just, I think, national, but should be global, is really important, especially given that we're about to see, how does the market look like? Where are these companies, these big names built? Where are they made? So yeah, moving on to the market players, as you mentioned, right? The industry is growing at a very rapid rate. It's about like close to 40% growth every year until 2026. And the biggest names come from, surprise, Silicon Valley. So you have Tesla, the first, publicly known for their fully self-driving cars. They've released videos of doing entire road trips all the way just within cities to between cities. And now in December, actually, they're going to release a full system beta where the driver still has to be there, but it's so a step further. So we'll definitely, look forward to that.
Apparently Elon Musk has promised this since 2 years already. So it could be 2021. So we're not sure about that.
Yeah, and then then there's the obvious Waymo that is now owned by Alphabet. They have the most distance traveled. They've been a long-time competitor in autonomous driving against Tesla. So they were introduced actually not that long ago, but they've become a strong player in the markets. Then we have other car companies that are participating, usually in combination. So Volvo, for instance, is working together with Uber. Would you want to name a few? There's so many.
Yeah, the reason why we state all these players is to show that, or it goes to show that there's a lot of money being invested into this by big companies, a lot of horsepower, but also they are coming from different industries. and they are tackling different problems within solving AV. And this really is necessary given the complexity that we've seen that AV causes and that AV needs when you build a safe, or when you want to build a safe system. So
I mean, I think one aspect that you just mentioned, right? This could fundamentally rethink the supply chain of how cars are produced, right? Instead of producing everything in-house, now with autonomous vehicles, you have companies like NVIDIA that produce these sensors to enable cars to make real-time driving decisions. And, no company, with the exception of Tesla, is really going to go all in and produce an autonomous vehicle all on their own. It would, in some sense, probably make more sense to couple a big industry name like BMW that has years of experience, service, already has the capabilities, infrastructures, to just use them and that they collaborate with someone like NVIDIA.
Yeah.
So
just to a final word on this from my side. Also, we've been talking a lot about private cars, but there's also players that look into transportation or that look into delivery. Uber and Lyft, for instance, in transportation, or Nuro, which just recently raised $1.5 billion in Series B and C for autonomous delivery.
Wow.
And also companies like Bosch, so industrial companies and technology companies in general, let's say.
Yeah, and then, of course, beyond Silicon Valley, the next kind of big pool is in China, right? We have Baidu, Pony.ai, Tencent, Neo is another big competitor, Didi or Beijing New Energy, and even Tesla actually has a gigafactory in Shanghai, I believe. Or, it was Shanghai, right?
I don't know.
Okay. So these are kind of the big players you have. Mainly it's coming from, Silicon Valley and China. And beyond that, you have some other players like Navia in France or Hanwha in South Korea, Yandex in Russia, and then others that are not primarily interested in producing cars for personal transportation and mobility, but more just for transportation of goods like Bosch.
Absolutely. And as you know, the U in UTX is for Utopian. And
so we're thinking
continuing.
of a utopian day. Like what does a day in the life look like when we have perfectly automated vehicles, right? Level 5. So how does it look like? What do you do when you get up in the morning?
Let's talk about the principles that govern my day first. So human error will be eliminated, and time and resources will be efficiently being used. I will have a much bigger span of attention for entertainment, which will bring me increased satisfaction. And in general, my everything that is transportation, mobility, and supply chains around me will look differently. So,
So I mean, imagine,
what does that mean?
You get up in the morning and you order breakfast. You get up at 6:30 in the morning. You maybe go do your workout. You come back. You have a shower, and then your food of the day is delivered. Right? You have fresh vegetables, maybe from Amazon Fresh. All the food that you need for breakfasts and maybe also dinner arrives in an autonomous vehicle. You can interact with the truck. You scan the QR code using your phone. You make the payment, and out of the truck pops a little box with exactly your items in it. You take it home. You enjoy a good breakfast. And what do? Do you get into a car and complain about traffic?
No, I won't, right? Because first of all, the traffic system is being organized much more efficiently, so I can get wherever I want to go quicker. I can enjoy the experience more because I can fully immerse myself in the car, so to speak. I don't have to drive. And also, it will be much easier for me to plan. To get my work done and just go about my day.
Exactly. So imagine, right, with car sharing becoming more prevalent, instead of you buying a car, you own a car together with 3 other friends, and the car, picks you all up and drives you to each person's work destination. And for you, that might take maybe an hour and a half, but you don't have to drive. You don't have to sit in front of the steering wheel. You have a nice table, you have a socket, you got your coffee, you're maybe working, you're taking a break, you're just enjoying your time, maybe you're enjoying the view, you're getting work done. So by the time you're in the office, you've already done 1 to 2 hours of work. You spend your time in the office. Of course, you don't have to stay until 4. You can leave at 2 because you're going to have another 1.5 hours to 2 hours commute back home. But what's commute, right? You're just working, continuing working, or maybe relaxing, enjoying yourself. You come home at 4, completely stress-free, not complaining about traffic because you don't know what that means. And in the meanwhile, you learn that your car has actually been Ubering or lifting all day and has generated some money for you. So you use that money to maybe go watch an autonomous racing competition, or maybe you can focus your fun of driving in a more specific environment and actually go on a drive and actually enjoy the process of driving rather than it being a pain while you get your way to traffic, to office.
And while my car can be a fellow lifter, no pun intended, it can also serve other functions. It can actually make me money during the day and become a valuable asset, for instance, by fulfilling delivery tasks for me.
Exactly. Like being an Uber Eats, or maybe delivering packages, or being a taxi and transporting people, or maybe doing all of it at the same time. I mean, doesn't that sound like a much better day? You can work from your car, you can enjoy your view, you don't have stress about traffic. And the
Where
fact
can
that
I subscribe?
Down in the right below this video, our Instagram or our YouTube channel is Techniax. Subscribe for more updates. Our next episode will be on, I think, what's the future of air travel, right? So how will air travel look like, right? We have SpaceX, we have other interesting and exciting opportunities. So how will that look like? So that will be the topic of the next week. For now, I think, yeah, we got a pretty good idea of how autonomous vehicles can change the world. Really fundamentally, I think it's been one of the most innovative and impactful topics that we've discussed so far. We've only discussed 3, granted, but I think I'm really excited to see how the future is going to look like.
Absolutely. I think this topic is really out there, so it's really futurist, but it's being heavily worked upon, and we could see big changes, big shifts to society caused by this within the next 5 to 10 years, given the organizations that work on this. So that's really an exciting topic.
Yeah, and that will be it from our side. If you want to go through the sources, etc., more detailed, check out our blog post. You'll find the links in the description, as well as the links to our Instagram channel and any other. If you're listening to this from Spotify, you can check us out on YouTube or on Instagram, Twitter. If you're on any of these other platforms, you can check us out on the other platforms, and of course the blog. And that is it for this week.
One more mention, your Apple podcast is also coming. It takes a bit of time to distribute it, but it's also coming to the mix.
That sounds great. In that case, I'd say stay utopian.
You're maniacs.